I can't express to you how honored I have been to have served as your president this past year. I was introduced to the Southwest Surgical Congress early on in my career, and I found it a warm, friendly place to meet others in my field, exchange ideas, and learn of different ways to treat and look at surgical problems. I've made friends through the meeting that I would not have otherwise met and remain grateful to the society. I'd like to express my appreciation to those who have mentored me and helped me along this path, and though there are way too many to name all, I just would like to show a few here. All of these are past presidents of the society. But for Steve Parks, whom I will remember fondly for welcoming me into the group when I was presenting here very early in my career, alone, and I actually knew no one. He was very kind, invited me to dinner, to join him to dinner, and ever since then I've been coming back. Since then, the Southwest Surgical Congress has been a surgical home for me, and I think of its members, all of you, like family. A sincere and special thanks to Clay Burlew for all the help you've provided and for setting the bar so high for me to follow. For Ken Murayama, who I've known, as Shanu mentioned, my entire professional career, longer than anyone else in the organization, as we were in medical school together. And he's kept me involved in the Southwest Surgical Congress. If I don't see him at any other time in the year, I know we'll at least see each other here. And a special thanks to Shanu, whom I had to show this photo of, a friend who I've met through the Southwest Surgical, for all your help and the kind introduction. These kinds of friendships are what make the Southwest Surgical Congress special to me, and I'd especially like to thank Gail Tominaga, who fulfilled the role of program chair this year amazingly. She put in many long hours planning the event, asked for and tolerated my crazy ideas without complaint, and handled setbacks without being fazed. Also, a special thanks to all the committee members who have done tremendous work and helped make this organization successful. I can't name you all, but you've all done a tremendous job, and I appreciate it. I could not have done any of this work without your help. And thanks to the LP group, I don't have all of your photos here, but for Noni, who's listed on the top, she's certainly going to be is missed. We remember all the work she put into this society. And for Margie and Jill, who've filled in when she left and kept it going remarkably well. And to my amazing colleagues at home who keep the ship afloat while I'm away and who are a pleasure to work with every day. Also to my family, you've seen this photo before, but I would not be here today without your support and love. My children, Zachary and Isaac, put up with my long hours, not to mention tolerating my jokes, and especially my wife, Jody, who never wants her picture taken, who's always smiling and seeing the bright side of life. She supported me along this path every step of the way. She raised our 2 children and kept me sane throughout my career. I would not have been able to do this without you. I love you, and I thank you for all you do. Regarding the topic of this address, there are many serious issues facing surgery currently, not the least of which include the serious ongoing opiate threat, the significant mass violence we witnessed of late, the challenges in healthcare finance, challenges in access to healthcare for the disadvantaged, issues surrounding surgical training, and many other problems. Many of these topics I have very strong opinions on, but I wouldn't do them justice in this short time that I have. We will, however, have an opportunity to delve into some of these in more depth in the coming days of the meeting. And there are other issues on the horizon we have not even mentioned yet, such as the impending C5 disc herniation of the entire millennial population. Okay, that wasn't serious, but I have been told by many that they have not gotten a chance to know me. And I've been encouraged to use this time to address that. Shanu started on that road. This is not surprising to me, as I am, in general, a relatively reserved person, not one to openly push my views on others. And I've reluctantly agreed to speak a bit about my background and perhaps impart some of what I've learned over these years that it took me for my hair to turn gray. I must say that I've never given a talk such as this. Most of my public speaking has been on scientific topics and not of a personal nature, but I'm going to try. I have no references and only personal stories and a few thoughts on surgery for your consideration. Before I start on correcting Shanu on how really I grew up, I want to jump ahead to acknowledge some important mentors. As Isaac Newton reportedly said, "If I have seen further than others, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." For me, the list of impressive mentors along the way is long, but I would particularly like to note and thank the inspiration and teaching of Dr. General Thomas Whalen. He was chairman of the Department of Surgery at the University of Hawaii School of Medicine, where I did my surgical residency training. His tremendous understanding of surgery and his role model of professionalism, it was amazing. His extensive experience and passion for teaching was truly impressive, and a real inspiration for the expectations of the dedication it takes and that's required to the art of surgery. And when I say art, I mean it. I will speak more on art in a bit, but Dr. Whalen would correct any resident who presented a patient underwent a surgery for, say, appendicitis by pointing out that the patient did not undergo a surgery, instead underwent an operation, as surgery refers to an entire discipline, or more accurately, an art. There are many who have helped me along my career, and of special note here are John Hyatt, who inspired me to lend my surgical training specialty to treat the injured patient, and inspired me to take an academic career. Mike Shabbat, who was a man of amazing talent, Achilles Dimitriou, and Bruce Gewirtz, both sequential chairmen at the Cedars-Sinai, which I have made my academic home, and both of whom have been so supportive. So to tell a little bit about me, there's not that much. I'm a pretty simple guy. I enjoy my work. I will get into that in a bit. I enjoy my family and my dogs. This is Kitsune, who you've seen, and this is Beowulf. I am, in fact, amazed and awed by the process of planting and growing herbs and vegetables and fruit. That one can plant a seed and weeks later be eating the results still amazes me. I therefore love to care for my small garden. My wife tires of me of bringing in the food every night to our dinner and trying to add it. But the process is still amazing. I like to fish and participate in the sport of the decade, whether it be triathlons or when I was younger, golfing. Triathlons when I was younger or golfing as I do now. I like to read and enjoy. This is some of the fish photos. These are some fish we caught off the shore, not in the boats. I like to read and enjoy obtaining vitamin D from our closest star, and often do the two at the same time. I also like to hike, and I still do. So you may be wondering what this title is about, and to begin to address that, I was born on the island of Oahu at the very end of the 1950s, the very year, in fact, that Hawaii became the 50th state of the Union. My parents, shown here, I believe, moved as far from New York City as was possible while still remaining within the United States. Here's an early photo with me, my father, my older sibling, and my younger sister, and our dog. And one of us sitting under an oil-colored portrait of our family painted by my grandfather. As the weather basically never changed, we spent a lot of time outdoors. I reveled in the tropical life. As children, my parents would take us to the beach frequently. As you can see, there were not many, in fact, none others around. Back then, in fact, there weren't very many people in Hawaii, and it was not very populated. We learned of all the island life joys, whether it be the local Hawaiian food, or shown here, eating shaved ice. That's Hawaiian. The Hawaiian Pidgin English is very specific about that. It's not shaved ice, it's shave ice. We could climb coconut trees, open coconuts with machetes, and of course we didn't wear shoes much, nor did we have much use for shirts. And of course, we learned to surf. In fact, as a teenager, I spent much of my time in the water. And in fact, I believe I learned many a lesson in the ocean, which carries into the art of surgery, but more on that in a bit. The 60s were an interesting time to grow up in Hawaii, with the popularization of rock and roll, the hippie culture, and in Hawaii, the growth in the sport of surfing. Many in my neighborhood would make their own boards in their garages, and the smell of resin drying on fiberglass was ubiquitous. One of the kids who lived down the street we surfed with made it big on this on his own and had a line of products, but ended up dying in a big wave surfing in famous Big Wave Beach in California. Nobody asked then, do you surf? All the kids just did. As I grew up, I availed myself to the other wonders of the islands. As I said, I like to hike. Essentially, over my years there, I explored all of the islands. I share but a few of the places I went to with you here. This is the very top of Maui's volcanic mountain, Haleakala. Inside there is a crater, which is really quite interesting. It's located at 10,000 feet. We would hike through here, starting out on one side, which is like a desert. And there's quite interesting flora there, some of that I've shown here. This is a silver sword plant blooming. It's found only one place in the entire world, which is that crater. As you'd cross the terrain, across this crater, the climate and the terrain changed until you got to the other side, where it actually became like a rainforest. And in fact, you could climb all the way down to the ocean. Another spot I liked to hike many times is this awesome beach in Kauai. Some of you may have done. It's called Kalalau Valley. It's a bit of a hike to get to, as there are no roads that are even remotely close. This view shows the back of the valley here, which is reported to be the wettest spot on Earth. The water would run down and eventually get to the beach, and this waterfall actually goes down to the sand on the beach. So it's a great place for showering off in fresh water after swimming. As Shanu mentioned regarding my schooling, my parents were both academic types. My father, a professor of American history, my mother, an English teacher. And they became less than impressed with the education I was receiving in the local schools. So for high school, they offered for me to go to one of the two better private schools on the island. Ken, having gone to the other one, I went to this one. For this, I am grateful. It's an old school. It was started by the missionaries for their own children, so they didn't have to ship their kids back to Boston so they could get schooling. And here I am, a Jew, one of the few Jews on the island going to a missionary school. As Shanu mentioned, I was interested in sport. I ended up in this sport, gymnastics. It's a bit of a story how I got into that, but basically was bouncing on my bed all the time doing flips, and my mother said, why don't you get some training in that, and enrolled me into some. So I got into this, and I've got to say it took a lot of time, but I think that certainly taught me discipline. Participation in sports, I believe, makes for a strong surgeon because of the many lessons it teaches. It was an odd sport for someone who grew to be nearly 6 feet tall. I'd have to move the mats away from the under, which is not a great idea, but when I was doing the high bar. But I put the effort in, and as he said, I narrowly won the all-around men's championship in high school. Popular as it was, these are actually real pictures. It was not a very popular sport in Hawaii. Football was much, much more popular, as you can see from this barely discernible article with my misspelled name. The high school I went to did promote independent thinking, and I believe I was successful at that. As he mentioned, one student ahead of me I knew started the company of AOL, which was the first dial-up internet access, and another classmate 2 years, my junior, did become president of the United States. Not the current one, but the one prior. So anyway, I was strong in the science and math departments and chose to attend Stanford for college, as that was as far east as I was willing to go. I majored in mechanical engineering there, and though I didn't practice engineering, I was glad to have gone there. Not only did I learn a structured way to analyze problems, it gave me a football team I could root for my entire life. Ultimately, I did choose medicine over engineering, and as Shanu outlined, came back to the islands for medical school. Here I met my wife in Hawaii in medical school, and she joined me in these hiking adventures. What a sport. I've got to say, she really was a trooper. I would take her hiking. Here I took her to the side of a cliff, only to find out later she's deathly afraid of heights. One time we went to climb Mount Mauna Loa. It's a long road up there. It's the tallest mountain on the island of Hawaii. I had done this before. I knew where to go. I took her up there. Normally one drives to 4,000 feet, gets out, starts climbing, and along the way there are 3 cabins. You get to be acclimated as you go up to 14,000 feet. But not always are things the way they should be, and sometimes the lava just covers the road. So we're not allowed to drive up that way. So we actually decided we'll just drive up the back way. There's an observatory in the back at 11,000 feet, and started hiking. That wasn't the most best idea, because quickly we got to 14,000 feet and I started to get altitude sickness. My wife had to save me by taking me down the next day. We basically, this is from that hike, I couldn't move. I was sick, and we pitched a tent, no cabins, in a little rock crevice we found. The next day went back down. I owe a lot to my wife. After medical school, Jody and I married before I could start my surgical residency and have her scared off by that. Anyway, in my various roles across the country, I speak to many surgeons and residents. And although I see a lot of hope, I sense a lot of frustration out there too. In this talk, I wanted to remind you of some of the awesome aspects of what we do. I mentioned Dr. Whalen. This is a picture you've seen. I mentioned Dr. Whalen's comments on how surgery is an art. And it got me thinking more about art and what influenced me as a surgeon. For this influence, I mentioned 2 of my grandparents. One of my grandfathers shown here was an artist, the other a physician. I feel the influences of both make up parts of me. The combination of art and medicine is interesting. Shown here is my grandpa Joe in his early years, and just a few of his works here. He was extremely talented, and the influence of art on my life was always present. He painted in all medium, oil, watercolor, even made lithographs and etchings. Art helps the enjoyment of life, and he certainly did. He's shown here playing music and singing, and just this is with my grandmother there. Just a few of his works are shown here. He was constantly painting. This is a self-portrait of him. He would do faces, many of the older Jewish faces, scholars. He would, shown here in prayer. These are etchings, and some of the ones that I had just on our wall. He would do landscapes and water scenes. He loved to paint the fishermen in Gloucester, Massachusetts, the fishing boats, the reflections off the water, and this is a fisherman in oil. This is a little young girl in Italy. I'm sorry, Venice, when he was traveling through Europe. And a pastel drawing. This is just a drawing of me when I was 6 years old. He would constantly draw us every time he came to visit. So this is hanging on my wall in my office. He let me choose a watercolor when I was a young boy, and I chose this one and put it on my office wall. This is a portrait of my father when he was young, a pastel drawing. And interestingly, my mother's family commissioned this was my father's father, to paint their daughter. And this is a pastel of my mother when she was young as their daughter, shown here. And the two had never met, not till much later in life. But we have these two pastels of them when they're nearly the same age. My sister is an artist as well, as is her husband. Here's her husband. He does some unusual types of art. I believe everyone has an innate artistic talent, even if they're not trained, and they can at least appreciate it. I learned to be aware of the beauty all around us every day. This is my sister does hand-painted animation, puts those together, not using a computer. If not actual works of art, see the beauty that surrounds us every day. This is just some weeds that grew up across the street the other day. I took a photo. And these are just everyday. This is from my yard. If you don't have plants to look at, think about the clouds. This was one taken from outside my house. Clouds make the most amazing art. These are from, this is a close-up of the photo you just saw. I mean, and then they're there and then they're gone. This is from my office window at work. Behind that's the Hollywood sign, and it just seemed to me that looked like a duck. Anyway, my wife, this is also from my office window. My wife and I like to find artwork around. She finds them mostly unknown artists with talent. Here, see just a few, some of the ones we have in our home. Really remarkable. Now, I want each of you to try to remember the first operation you saw, probably as a medical student. The operation itself can be a thing of beauty, analogous to a work of art. When each move is precise, correct, optimal in brevity and timing, and the dissection goes perfectly, the operation becomes like a work of art. Remember that awe that you saw the first time you saw this operation? Try to recreate that in every case that you do. I heard David Feliciano mention this morning that when he was describing on how to judge the length of his SMA graft, that it was like an art form, if you will, to quote him exactly. So I think he has a similar appreciation. My mother's father was an ophthalmologist, academic type. He even had a syndrome named after him. This is him when he was an intern. And despite not being an artist himself, I found a drawing of the fundus of an eye as reflected in this disease that he was quoted in a paper that he wrote. So we can all appreciate art, if not create it. Beauty is all around us. The other thing to remember, I want you to remember, is why, in fact, you chose medicine in the first place. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others?" In general, the reason most chose medicine is some variation on the theme of trying to help others. It's important to remember this with all the frustrations that modern surgery has. So, I mentioned that I would discuss surfing a little more. And I know you're wondering, what does surgery have to do with surfing? What could they possibly have in common, other than the first three letters? Thinking back, my time in the ocean i.e. my view from the island, taught me so many useful lessons that reflect on the art of surgery itself. In the limited time I have left, I'll mention but a few. First, study what's ahead, i.e., before going in, glean all that you can. This is very important before going in the water. The water can be tricky, with all sorts of currents, dangers, some evident and some hidden. Sometimes there are obvious signs. Here's my wife and my 2 sons looking out at the water. Other times the water can look inviting and benign. Even a small operation can go wrong. Know as much about the patient and the plan for the operation as possible before going in. Is this perforated ulcer NSAIDs related or a chronic recurring one with maximal medication? The operation would be altered. Number 2, make a plan. If this is where you want to go, surfing, how are you going to get there? What's the best way? If you head out this way, it's not going to be so easy. But if you go this way, it's much better. So which incision do you make? Plan your ports for their best advantage. Number 3, getting out there can be tough. It takes strength and perseverance. Residency is like that. But even after residency, these traits are important. How can you increase these traits? Practice helps tremendously. Similarly, stamina is required, not just arm strength. When a set of waves comes in, it's twice as big as before. One must dive and hold one's breath until it seems like your lungs are going to burst. There will be times when stamina is essential. When you've done 4 cases in a row, no one around, and the patient needs your help. We've all been there. Number 5, patience. Unlike in the movies, once you have paddled out past where the waves are breaking, you wait. Sometimes wait for a long time for a good wave to come in. In treating bowel obstruction, as you heard today, that you know will resolve, patience goes a long way. Waiting can be difficult, but often it's what's needed. Number 6, when you get out there and you're waiting, what do? There's time to chat. In Hawaii, no one is in a rush, and they chat. The local term for this is talk story. We in surgery always seem to be in a rush, with all the time demands put on us, but from the patient's perspective, to make just a little time to sit and talk really goes a long way. When the patient sees you in a rush, when you just come in and leave, he or she gets the feeling that you don't care. Perhaps sit down, if just for a bit, and talk. Number 7, this is an important one. Make a call. You see the wave coming, you start paddling. You get up speed, the wave raises you up. This is the guy I'm talking about. And you're looking down the face of the wave. At this point, you have to either back out or go full speed down the face. If you do neither, you're thrown over the top. It's called going over the falls, and it's not pretty. So, this is an example. This guy didn't make it, and this is what happens. So, you make a decision. Make the call. Similarly, sometimes you don't have all the information that you want, but it's important to make a decision. The hypotensive patient with blunt abdominal trauma needs an operation, most likely, not a CT scan, as radiation rarely stops bleeding. Just make the call to go to the OR. Number 8, stop. Try to recognize when to stop. This guy was going along and got off his board just in time. This is the damage control option, which is something you need to think about when you're getting into trouble. things may not always look so good, but you have an opportunity to get out, stop, when further operation might make things worse. Number 9, every decision matters. When you find yourself rushing to make an uninformed decision, slow down. It matters. I often share reading lists with my boys, and this science fiction book, Dark Matter, describes a process that each and every decision that one makes alters or affects one's entire future. Each creates a parallel universe which has its own unique trajectory. And though it's an interesting idea, and I'm not saying we have all these parallel universes, the decisions matter. Do you catch this wave or wait? When you're inside and you don't know what's coming, choose carefully. Sometimes when you're most in a hurry is when you need to slow down and choose carefully. No matter how good you are, there are times that you need help. I don't know if you can see the shark there. Once I was at Waimea Bay body surfing. Suddenly, a huge set came in. Everyone, including myself, was swept out to sea. Helicopters came, started plucking folks out of the water. I was a good swimmer, but I was helped out of the current by a lifeguard on a 20-foot board. Once out of the current, he let me go and said, "Swim back to shore." When you're in trouble, don't keep working at it yourself, but stop and recognize, call in some help. Everyone makes mistakes. If you're concerned about having had injured the common bile duct, call someone for an objective opinion and some help. It's not a failure, but the right thing for your patient. This one is civility. And although I could speak for a long time on this, likely as not, where the waves are good, there are bound to be a group all vying for that same wave, maybe even the same spot on the wave. Rather than bullying your way in, trying to use an orderly, respectful approach goes a long way. These are some of the rules printed in some beaches before going out. On the topic, I really could speak for a long time, but for brevity, I think civility and respect for our patients, our staff, and our colleagues is of utmost importance. Number 12 is that failure is part of the learning process. Do enough cases and you will have a case presented at M&M conference. Learn from it, don't be destroyed by it. 13, have fun. I try to inject humor in my life and rounds every day. Clearly capturing the power of the wave and flying through the water with no engine but the water itself is invigorating and tons of fun. So too is the art we practice. With all the serious implications of our work, it can be daunting. But remember to have fun. I've made that the case that operating is an art and creating art is enjoyable. Enjoy it. My kids know I can find humor in even the most mundane things, such as a street sign. Integrity is also of importance. In surfing, cutting someone off is just not right. Along with civility to others, what I have learned is that when faced with difficult situations, just ask yourself what is the right thing to do for the patient, not what is easy. That means personal sacrifice sometimes. You just spent a long case and put the anastomosis together, but if it doesn't look right, redo it. And it may seem okay, but you know that if you don't, you'll be spending more time worrying about it than if you just redid it. I tell my residents, just do the right thing. In general, if you pause, you'll know what that is. And lastly, family. This sport is a family sport, not something one does alone. Here you see moms and dads teaching their kids in Waikiki. If they're not out there in the water, there's someone waiting and watching from the shore. None of us could make it through what we do in surgery without family support. In summary, I've tried to point out the art and beauty in our work. try to stay amazed, and try to appreciate the wonders around us and in what we do. Of the lessons from surfing, I think it's safe to say that no other presidential address has compared surfing to surgery, and probably never will this happen again, which endorses my affinity for humor. But most important of these points that I've made and these musings are the last three: civility, integrity, and family. I still like to hike. These are my sons. This is Jody and I just last week in Santa Monica Mountains. I'm going to end there, but I cannot express to you how much all of you mean to me and my appreciation for you. Thank you.